where we need more than a feeling, more than a word, more than a prophecy or a rumor. Sometimes I need more than a preacher. I need more than a prophet. There are days that come where you can keep your gospel songs. You can keep your dances. If I'm going to go any further with this faith thing, God's going to have to show up and talk to me personally. There's no way I'm giving up all of this. There's no way I'm going to walk that walk. There's no way that I'm going to do what you want me to do in this way. There's no way that you're going to make me believe this or that unless God shows up. Listen, at one point, my father, who happens to be a preacher, became a preacher when I was about 13. My father told God he needed to see a rainbow 3 times a week to believe that God was actually talking to him. I said that God would have to audibly tell me that he wanted me to do something and place a bouncing arrow over where I was supposed to go when I was struggling at this kind of time. My wife has said she needs a letter written in the blood of the Lamb, notarized by God and sent by the Holy Spirit before believing whatever she was struggling with at that time. There are things that happen in our lives where we need God to show up and show out. And until then, we will be waiting for that moment. That's what the burning bush was for Moses. That's what the voice of God was to Samuel as a child. That's what the birth of Jesus was to the Jews. That's what the resurrection was to all believers. Jesus didn't have to come back to life for our salvation. He really just had to die as the sacrifice. But we needed to know without a shadow of a doubt that he was the Son of God and that he had power over sin and death. And that's what this appearance was for Thomas. Despite his disappointing lack of faith, Jesus still provided him with the moment he was waiting for. But there were some lessons that we can learn from Thomas' experience. Let's very briefly look at 3 things and I'll let you go to brunch. First, stubborn stipulations. Stubborn stipulations. I know an explanation is still necessary. The moment we've all been waiting for. Understand just how much Thomas was not trying to buy the story of Jesus' resurrection. When Mary saw an empty tomb, she ran and told Peter and John. They took off running from the tomb, and John outran Peter. He was the one that found the burial clothes while Peter saw the empty tomb. They went home not knowing what happened. Mary actually saw Jesus, and he spoke to her. She went back and told the disciples. Later that night, the disciples were locked in a room trying to make sure that the Jews didn't catch them. Then Jesus shows up in the room, but Thomas wasn't there that night. Now listen, we don't know why Thomas wasn't there. Some people believe it's because he was grieving on his own. You have to remember, his fear did turn to reality. Jesus was now dead. That's what he thought was going to happen. But in this moment of grief, he pulled away from the Christian fellowship. He wasn't with the believers. And because he wasn't with the believers, he missed Jesus. That's a sermon for another time. But when all the disciples tell Thomas that they saw Jesus, the people he's been traveling with for 2 to 3 years, this tight-knit crew, when the 10 other disciples tell him, plus Mary, that they saw Jesus, he doesn't believe them. Now, these were not random people. This was not random gossip. He had been with these guys for years. These were people he could trust, and he didn't even try to find out if they were telling the truth. He didn't run to the tomb like Peter and John. He didn't wait around like Mary. He didn't even listen to his friends. He was simply not going to believe. He said that he would have to touch Jesus' wounds before he could believe that he came back from the dead. He made a stubborn stipulation. Many of us have been here before. Something happens in our lives that has pulled us away from the church and other believers. So while others are being blessed, we are being mad about it. And then no matter how many trustworthy people try to tell us what we need to do with Jesus, no matter all the advice that's given to us and the direction provided, no matter who and where it comes from, sometimes it's just not enough. Sometimes our pain is too powerful, our sorrow is too static, our confusion is too confounding, our grief is too grand for us to hear anything that anybody else has to say. That's when we start making demands. Trying to make God jump through hoops that make us happy. Coming up with something that is hard or inconvenient by our standards. And saying that God has to do this difficult thing. Now, our demands are easy to God. They are only complicated to us. So in the big scheme of things, we're setting ourselves up. Because either God won't feed our ego fulfill these demands, or God will fulfill them because it's easy. So the first thing that we have to remember is not to make the stubborn stipulations. The second thing that we have to learn is about defensive doors. I know, defensive doors, I know, an explanation is still necessary. The moment we have all been 8 days go by, they are back in the same room with the doors shut. When Jesus shows up and says, "Peace be unto you," and goes straight for Thomas. Defensive doors. There is a moment that arises where we are waiting to see what God's going to do, where we can be open and receptive to answers. Or we can have all of our doors closed. Now understand, the disciples had the door closed in their room to make sure that the Jews wouldn't find them. But the closed door also symbolizes Thomas's unwillingness to be open to Jesus. What this shows us is that despite of where we are, despite if we're trying to hide, trying to run, or trying to lay low, Jesus can meet us wherever we are and doesn't need to ask for our permission. This is another moment that some of us have been waiting for right here. The fact that no matter what's going on, that Jesus can show up in your situation. No matter if the doors of your life are closed, locked, warped, or broken, Jesus can be prepared and looking for you, getting through defensive doors just to give you the gift of Jesus. And notice, Jesus never opened the door. This means that it's still your responsibility to open yourself up. It's still up to you to make the decisions you have to make, but know that he can get you and help you even if nobody else can. This is what Thomas didn't believe. He thought that what he saw people do to Jesus had power over Jesus. But somebody in here knows that nothing that people can do to Jesus can change who Jesus is and what he can do. You can say he's not real. You can say the church is a sham and therefore so is Jesus. You can say how much you hate organized religion and that Jesus is not the Son of God. You can say that it's just a tool to keep the ignorant and blind people in a certain way of thinking. You can say that all day. But like I tell my young people when they're trying to convince themselves of something, just because you say it doesn't mean it's true. Listen, you can talk about church all day long. You have a problem with me when you start talking about Jesus. Look, I know the arguments against the faith. I know them. I know the arguments against the church. I know the criticisms against the church. I also know the church and its practice as well. I've seen it. I've been a part of it. I studied church history over the years. So I hear all the issues. And some of them I actually agree with. So I don't do this thing called ministry because of church. Because during my younger, more philosophical, erudite, intelligent years, when I had become agnostic, not knowing if there was a God, and being jaded since I was so enlightened to the way that men have used religion as power over the years. When I was in the worst part of my life, it was Jesus who spoke to me in a personal way, in a personal place, in a locked room, physically and spiritually, without having me go to him. I do this because of my Thomas-like relationship with Jesus, where he got to me even though no one else could. My point is, your defensive doors may work on man, but thanks be to God that Jesus can still meet you. The barriers you put up because of abuse, the doors you lock because of pain, hate, and disdain, the things you kept out because you're too smart for all the tricks that people try to play on you, you protected yourself. So maybe church can't reach you, but Jesus still can. And for the record, church don't reach me either. Y'all just need to know that when I'm up here now. Jesus reached me. Number one, stubborn stipulations. Number two, defensive doors. And number three, a master's moment. I know. An explanation is still necessary. I hope that you have given me your full cooperation, your total attention, because I will finish on this one. After Jesus greets everyone, he tells Thomas to do exactly what Thomas said he would have to do in order to believe. If Thomas had so little faith the way people make it out to be, if he doubted so much the way people say he did, then why would Jesus come back just for him? Simple, because Thomas still loved Jesus. He still followed Jesus, and Jesus still loved him. Jesus knew that Thomas was hurting. He knew that he didn't know which way to turn. So Jesus came back just for him and gave him a master's moment. He had him take his hand and place it in his wound. Jesus asked Thomas, "Can you feel me?" And Thomas had to say yes. Thomas got a one-on-one lesson that no matter how far you have gone, Jesus will still come and get you if you just believe. This was the moment that Thomas had been waiting for. He just needed to see Jesus for himself. Give me 5 minutes and it's a wrap. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment that we've all been waiting for is to have that master's moment. To have Jesus come back just for us. When God shows himself the way that we need to see him. And there may be a few of you who have grown to the point that you don't look for God to meet you where you are anymore. Well, God bless you. I hope that I grow up to be like you one day while I'm on my way to being like Jesus. But there are others in the house. There are others in the house who need a little bit of help every now and then. Who need a visit every now and then. Who find ourselves making stubborn stipulations. Who put ourselves behind defensive doors and who are looking for a master's moment. Well, if you do it right, you'll have the moment, but you won't have to go through everything that Thomas went through. See, Thomas was able to see Jesus like everybody else, but he saw him last, and therefore spent the least amount of time with him. See, if we do it right, if we trust in God with all our heart, if we don't lean on what we think we know, if we have faith and believe, God will show up the way we need him, time after time. Sometimes just for a visit. Sometimes just to encourage you. But if you're like me and Thomas, still working to be like Peter and John, Jesus can meet you there as well. As long as you keep on trying to meet him. That's why Jesus got up, so that his followers could get exactly what they needed, a risen Savior, to give us that moment that we've all been waiting for, a master's moment, when he comes how we need him and when we need him. Listen, I'm done, but let me say this. We should keep on trying to meet Jesus so that Jesus doesn't always have to meet us. That's why Jesus said to Thomas, "You believe now that you see, but blessed are those who believe without seeing." If I were a grown-up preacher, I'd say it this way, that Jesus let Thomas know that I shouldn't have had to do this. But what I love about Jesus is he did it anyway. See, Jesus shouldn't have had to come in the first place. But what I love about Jesus is that he did it anyway. Jesus shouldn't have had to be rejected by his own people. But what I love about Jesus is that he did it anyway. He shouldn't have had to be betrayed and arrested and treated like a criminal. But what I love about Jesus is he did it anyway. He shouldn't have had the system fail him and be sentenced to death. But what I love about Jesus is that he did it anyway. He shouldn't have had to wear a crown of thorns, be whipped and forced to carry his own cross. But what I love about Jesus is that he did it anyway. He shouldn't have had to hang between two malefactors, being mocked and be forced to take on the sins of the world. But what you the way you want to. He can meet all stipulations. He can do anything you ask him. The question is, will you do anything that he asks you? Let's not get it twisted. Thomas followed Jesus for years. Thomas did the work. Thomas walked by his side. Thomas was Jesus' boy. The question is not, can Jesus do it for you? Just can you do it